In 1987, everyone in America, it seemed, was looking for a good deal. For Alan and Debbie Tallmann of Horicon, Wisconsin, a small, quiet town where nothing much ever happened, finding a second-hand bunk bed for their children felt like a victory. It was a sturdy, unassuming piece of furniture, purchased for a bargain price, ready to become a centerpiece in their children's room. They were a completely normal, hard-working family, building a life in their modest home. They had no way of knowing that this simple act of bringing home a used item was about to unleash a torrent of unimaginable horror. Some bargains come at a cost you can't see on the price tag. For the Tallmann family, this second-hand bunk bed wasn't just a piece of furniture. It was a Trojan horse, carrying a malevolent and fiery force right into the heart of their home. The first signs that something was deeply wrong were subtle, easily dismissed as quirks of an old house or overactive imaginations. Shortly after the bunk bed was assembled and placed in the children's room, the family's radio began to act strangely. It would turn on by itself, the dial spinning wildly across the frequencies before settling on a wall of static. From this static, a voice would emerge. It was a deep, guttural man's voice, speaking directly to them. It would whisper chilling phrases, promises of doom like "you're dead and come find me." At first, Alan, a pragmatic man, tried to find a logical explanation. Maybe it was a neighbor's CB radio, or a strange transmission bleeding through. But the voice knew them, and it seemed to fill the house with a palpable sense of dread. Simultaneously, a more disturbing pattern emerged. The Tallmann children, once healthy and energetic, became perpetually ill. Whenever they were near the bunk bed, they were overcome with a strange sickness, a persistent flu-like condition that doctors couldn't diagnose. The moment they were taken out of the house, their symptoms would vanish, only to return the second they came home. It was as if a toxic, unseen energy was radiating from the wood of the bed, poisoning the very air the children breathed. The bargain bed was no longer just a piece of furniture. It was becoming the epicenter of a creeping, inexplicable sickness that was draining the life from their family. The whispers from the radio were just the beginning. The entity was just getting warmed up. The subtle disturbances soon escalated into overt physical manifestations of a terrifying presence. The sense of being watched became a certainty. Doors throughout the house would slam shut with violent force, even with no breeze to move them. Lights would flicker and then turn on and off in empty rooms, as if an unseen hand were playing with the switches. The family dog would bark and cower, its eyes fixed on empty corners of the room, refusing to enter the children's bedroom where the bunk bed stood. The atmosphere in the home grew heavy, charged with a hostile energy that was impossible to ignore. It was no longer a case of strange coincidences. It was clear they were not alone. Then came the apparition. The children, already weakened and terrified, began seeing a figure in their room at night. They described a horrifying old woman with long, stringy black hair and a face contorted in a silent scream. Her eyes, they said, glowed like embers in the dark. In one of their most terrifying encounters, they saw her standing beside the bunk bed, slowly raising a gnarled hand. A finger of pure fire extended from her fingertip, pointing directly at them. The vision was so vivid, so real, that their screams brought Alan and Debbie running. The figure would vanish, but the chilling cold and the lingering smell of sulfur would remain. The entity was no longer just whispering threats. It was showing them the gruesome fate it had in mind. Desperate for help, the Tallmanns turned to their local pastor. He was a man of faith, but what he encountered in their home shook him to his core. As he attempted to bless the house, praying in the living room, a heavy armchair across from him began to rock back and forth on its own. Slowly at first, then with increasing violence. The pastor watched, frozen in disbelief, as the chair rocked as if an invisible, enraged person was sitting in it. He stopped his prayer, his face pale with shock. He turned to the terrified family and delivered a stark, chilling warning that confirmed their deepest fears. Get out of this house immediately. There was no blessing that could save them. They were dealing with a power that was beyond his help. And then the worst nightmare began. Fire. Not a fire from a faulty wire or a tipped candle, but fire from thin air. The entity's torment escalated from psychological warfare to a direct, lethal assault. The first incident was baffling. A plastic trash can in the hallway, containing nothing but a few scraps of paper, suddenly burst into flames. The fire was intense, melting the plastic into a bubbling pool before it could be extinguished. Firefighters were called, and they inspected the scene, finding absolutely no source of ignition. It was impossible, yet it had happened. This was just the first of many supernatural blazes. The phenomenon grew more terrifying and more blatant. Flames, described as orange and blue, would erupt from the middle of the living room carpet, shooting up from the floor with no fuel to sustain them. They would lick at the air for a few moments before vanishing as quickly as they appeared, leaving behind scorch marks and the acrid smell of smoke. A vacant chair would suddenly be engulfed in fire. An empty wall would spontaneously combust. The attacks were random, unpredictable, and utterly terrifying. Firefighters became frequent, bewildered visitors to the Tallmann home. They were called to the house 13 times over a short period. Seasoned professionals who had seen everything were left speechless, witnessing flames appear from nowhere and admitting they could find no natural cause, no accelerant, no faulty wiring. They were witnessing paranormal fires with their own eyes. This entity didn't just want to scare the Tallmanns. It was actively trying to burn them alive. The breaking point came on a frigid winter night in February 1988. Another spontaneous fire had erupted, this one closer to the children than ever before. Staring into the unnatural flames, Alan and Debbie knew they had no choice. The thing in their house would not stop until it had consumed them. In a state of pure panic, they grabbed their children and a few essential belongings. They didn't have time to pack properly. They simply had to escape. They ran out into the cold Wisconsin night, abandoning their home and almost everything they owned. The fear was so profound that they didn't dare take most of their possessions, terrified that the curse was attached to more than just the bed and would follow them wherever they went. That night, the Tallmann family became refugees, fleeing not from a person or a natural disaster, but from a supernatural force that had turned their American dream into a living hell. After the Tallmanns fled, a strange and telling quiet fell over the house at 1129 North University Avenue. The new tenants who moved in reported no strange occurrences. The slamming doors, the disembodied voice, and the terrifying, spontaneous fires all ceased the moment the family left. This eerie silence confirmed what the family had suspected all along. The haunting was not in the house itself, but was intrinsically tied to the bunk bed. Summoning their courage, the family eventually returned to the empty, quiet house for one final, grim task. They retrieved the cursed bunk bed, loaded it onto a truck, and drove it to the local landfill. There, with a mixture of fear and relief, they systematically dismantled and destroyed it, smashing the wood into unrecognizable pieces, ensuring it could never torment another family again. As the last piece was buried beneath the refuse, it seemed the curse was finally broken. The terror was over. The Tallmann case remains one of the most thoroughly documented and frightening poltergeist cases of the modern era. Heavily investigated by paranormal researchers and covered by media outlets like Unsolved Mysteries, no one ever discovered the true, dark history of that second-hand bunk bed, who had owned it before, or what tragedy might have imbued it with such a malevolent, fiery spirit. But the family's harrowing story serves as a chilling, timeless warning that resonates to this day. It reminds us to be careful what we bring into our homes, especially objects with a past we cannot know. Because sometimes an old item doesn't just carry memories of a life once lived. Sometimes it carries nightmares, waiting for a new family to haunt.